In the 1960s, people didn't buy pickup trucks for show. They bought them because they had to work. They could haul, tow, and handle, no questions asked. But that's when someone decided, let's try something weird. And eventually, pickup trucks appeared that looked like working vehicles, but in reality were uncomfortable, illogical, and in some places downright annoying. Some of them made you doubt yourself within the first 5 minutes behind the wheel. Some looked like they'd been built on a bet, and some weren't even sure whether they were a car or a truck. And the funniest thing is, they weren't built for fun. They were built very seriously. Today, we'll look at the 5 best pickup trucks of the 1960s, vehicles that should have been able to work, but too often got in the way. Let's start with the pickup truck where the idea seemed bold, but in practice it turned out poorly in almost every way. The Dodge A100 pickup is that pickup truck that looks like it was conceived in a hurry and then said, okay, let's go. The cab is above the wheels, the driver sits practically on the front bumper, and the engine is right underneath you. At that point, you want to ask, have you even tried driving this? The idea was simple and seemingly clever: make a compact, work-ready pickup truck, short, maneuverable, and convenient for the city. On paper, it all looks great. In reality, it's hot, noisy, and feels like you're sitting on the engine, not particularly happy about your presence. The cabin is cramped, warm, loud, and any distance feels like a challenge. Now about the controls. With all the interior mass and you sitting practically above the wheels, the road vibrates too close. The steering is twitchy, turns require attention, and the empty bed makes the truck even less accessible. This is a pickup that constantly reminds you, you can't relax here. The work section also lets you down. The body seems to be working, but the load and balance are strange. Load it, and the behavior changes. Don't load it, and it gets worse. This is a case of having a pickup truck, but not being confident in it. The most interesting thing is that they tried to sell the A100 as a practical solution. They said it was compact, fuel-efficient, and modern. But people quickly realized it was inconvenient for work and tiresome to live in. Yes, it looked unusual. Yes, it attracted attention. But attention isn't what people buy a work truck for. The Dodge A100 pickup is a classic example of an idea that sounded better than it performed. Bold design, odd layout, and too many compromises for the sake of form. It wasn't a disaster, but it never became a good pickup truck either. It's precisely with vehicles like these that lists of the worst pickups of the 1960s begin, when experimentation was prioritized over common sense. The Chevrolet El Camino 1960 is a pickup truck that, from the very beginning, couldn't quite decide what it wanted to be. It's supposed to be a truck, but built like a car. It's supposed to be a car, but with an open bed. And that's where the main problem begins: compromise in everything. The idea sounded great: take a regular American car and add a bed to the back. They'd say we'd get the comfort of a car and the practicality of a pickup. In reality, it turned out the opposite. The El Camino was too soft for real work and too awkward for casual driving. Load up the bed and the truck sags and rides uncertainly. Don't load it and you're hauling around empty space, wondering why you even need it. The suspension was designed more for a light ride than for real payloads. This means the El Camino quickly made it clear it wasn't into towing heavy things. Yes, technically it's a pickup, but it feels like a truck that's constantly being used for other purposes. Its appearance also raised questions. To fans, it was stylish. To workers, it was odd. It didn't look like a reliable tool that could be trusted to do the job. It looked like a compromise, trying to please everyone at once. And that's the whole El Camino. It wasn't downright terrible, but it wasn't good either. It existed between two worlds and felt at ease in neither. Too soft for a pickup truck, too uncomfortable for a car. The Chevrolet El Camino became a symbol of an idea that only sounds cool in words, because when you try to do both, you very often end up with neither. That's why for many, the El Camino isn't a legend, but an example of how a good idea turns into a constant compromise. The Studebaker Champ is a pickup truck that immediately makes it clear it wasn't built because they wanted it that way, but because they had to. Studebaker was already struggling to survive in the early 1960s, and the Champ was an attempt to quickly stay in the game without spending too much.
And you can feel it in literally everything. Let's start with the exterior. If the Champ seems a little dated, you're not. They used bodies and panels from previous years, freshened up the details a bit, and called it done. Next to Fords and Chevrolets, it looked like a pickup from the past that accidentally ended up in the wrong year. Under the hood, the situation was no better. The engines were weak by the standards of the time, lacking in torque and lacking the feel of a reliable workhorse. This is critical for a pickup. It needs to pull without complaining, but the Champ felt more like a truck constantly being asked to do a little more than it could. The interior was very basic, lacking any coziness or the feeling of having bought something modern. It wasn't work-life minimalism, but rather a forced economy. Everything looked as if the truck had been hastily built and without much faith in the outcome.
And here's the key point. The Champ wasn't terrible, it was unconvincing. It offered no reason to choose it. Its competitors looked newer, drove more confidently, and inspired more confidence. But the Studebaker Champ looked like a temporary solution, which, in essence, it was. Sales quickly showed this. The Champ didn't save the brand, it wasn't a hit, and it left no lasting mark. It simply quietly disappeared, along with the company, which could no longer compete. The Studebaker Champ isn't a truck about engineering failure, but about the failure of the moment. A truck built without time, without resources, and without a future. And that's precisely why it fits perfectly into the list of the worst pickups of the 1960s.
The Toyota Stout 1965 was a pickup truck that wasn't a bad idea, but rather inappropriate for its time and place. Toyota was just entering the market, and the Stout was an attempt to show we can make pickups too. They could, yes. Whether anyone wanted to buy them was another matter. By Japanese standards, the Stout looked fine. Compact, simple, and fuel-efficient. But the problem began when they tried to sell it in a country where a pickup truck was considered a workhorse, not just a means of transportation. Compared to its American competitors, it looked small, weak, and frivolous. Under the hood was a modest engine with no reserve power. For everyday driving, it was passable. For work, questionable. Load up the bed and the truck immediately makes it clear that overloading it is a bad idea. This isn't a pickup you'd want to load without thinking. The suspension and chassis were designed for gentle use, not rough handling, and it felt that way. The Stout didn't fall apart, but it didn't inspire confidence either. It seemed to constantly beg for care, an odd request for a pickup truck. It didn't help itself visually either. The design was simple, lacking character and the sense of power. It didn't look like a tool you could rely on, more like a machine that tried to stay out of the way but didn't help either.
The most important thing is that the Toyota Stout wasn't a disaster. It was too early. The market wasn't ready to take a small Japanese pickup seriously, especially when it was surrounded by large, powerful, and proven American trucks. Toyota would eventually get it right, but the Stout was that first step, which is rarely successful. A pickup that showed the way, but itself remained in the shadows. The Toyota Stout is an example of how a good idea can fail simply because it came out at the wrong time and in the wrong place. It's precisely these kinds of vehicles that end up on worst of all trades lists, not because they're terrible, but because they don't fit the reality. The Datsun 320 pickup 1965 was a pickup truck that looked reasonable on paper, but in real life constantly asked one question: are you sure you're going to work with this? It was one of the first Japanese pickups to try to establish itself in a serious market, and that's where the problems began. It was small, very small. Compared to American pickups of the 1960s, the Datsun 320 looked more like an oversized passenger car with a bed than a fully fledged workhorse. For the city, it was fine. For real work, it was questionable. The engine was weak, with no sense of reserve. This pickup didn't pull confidently. It was more like it was trying. Load up the bed and you immediately feel like the truck is working at its limits. And when the truck starts to hint that it's struggling, confidence quickly vanishes. The suspension and frame were also designed for careful use. This wasn't a case of throwing a load down and not thinking twice. Here, you had to constantly remember how much you had loaded and where you were going. And for a pickup truck, that's a red flag. The Datsun 320's appearance didn't help itself at all. Its simple, almost featureless design lacked a sense of strength and reliability. It didn't look like a reliable vehicle. It looked like a temporary solution. The most important thing is, it wasn't terrible. It was insufficient. Not powerful enough, not robust enough,
not convincing enough. In a market where pickups were bought for durability and confidence, this proved fatally inadequate. The Datsun 320 became an example of how being early to the market can work against you. Japanese pickups would later conquer the world, but in the mid-1960s, this step was too early and too cautious. That's why the Datsun 320 pickup isn't a legend, but a reminder that being first doesn't mean you're ready. And it ended up on the list of worst pickups of the 1960s, not because of a disaster, but because of a disappointment.